Hello, Jason.
Hey, Corinne, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm very excited to be having this conversation with you, and we're going to talk about your paper, Political Resilience in Canada's Charitable Sector. Are we prepared? I think the answer might be maybe we could be more prepared. So let's tuck into it.
Awesome.
The paper really resonated with me, and I was thinking about why, and I wonder if that's because we both have backgrounds that really leverage communications at the core. And I do think that's one of the most important elements of fundraising. And it's a major theme throughout your paper, which we'll obviously tuck into. But let's start with your background. What would make you, what was the impetus? Why would you write this?
Well, you're absolutely right. We both do have extensive experience working in the charitable sector, and a lot of it in the comm side. Um,
Hmm.
that was a part of an underlying factor. But I have to say, I've been wanting to write this paper for a long time. I had this experience with one of the charities I was working with, where we believed ourselves to be really politically astute. We were really well positioned with the government in power. We had great connections to senior leadership. We had members of the political parties, whether it's member of parliament or senators, always attending our events. And we thought we were in a great place. And then, as you can imagine, inevitably, politics shifted, a new government came into power. And it took us 5 years to get government funding. And it wasn't because we were doing the wrong work or even sending out the wrong message, but we were kind of perceived as partisan because we had spent so much of our effort working uniquely with one political party. And it made me think we're always as charities trying to find that right balance between working with
Hmm.
who's in government, but also building authentic relationships across the spectrum. And if we're not taking that into consideration, we can be in a lot of trouble. And so, could a paper like this actually help start asking those really important questions as charities start to navigate what is a really challenging political landscape?
Right. So you're describing necessity as the mother of invention, but at the same time, I think we all have that same need. And so one of the things actually you talk about, though, is that need that comes about as a result of crisis. And you actually begin with an analysis of crisis as transformational, which I think is a really big thing to say. But at the same time, I guess I always feel that in many organizations, and certainly ones that I've worked in, we are often in crisis, even if it's not necessarily a national crisis or a medical crisis. But some organizations actually run on crisis. So, do you think this is a new trend? Why crisis?
Well, you're absolutely right. I can't imagine or I can't remember any organization I've worked with that at one period or another wasn't driven by some sense of imminent doom and crisis.
Yeah.
And whether it was true or whether it was imagined, uh, crisis spurred innovation, crisis spurred
Mm.
change, crisis spurred adaptive thinking. The difference is usually when there's that sense of crisis as normal, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but I think you know where I'm coming. When that
Hmm.
becomes a pattern of behavior, usually it's a crisis that relates to the how we do what we do. We're
Mm.
in crisis because we can't do the things we tend to do in the same way as we always do. And we're worried if we're going to be able to continue to do them in that way. The
Right.
crisis spurs the how and how we react to the how.
Mm.
But despite that, crisis shouldn't affect the why. Because no matter how we do what we do, a successful charitable organization will always be driven by mission.
Right.
And mission doesn't change from crisis. And so, in one sense, I completely agree. Crisis is an inevitability in our sector and does drive certain people's work. But what it shouldn't do is interfere with or undercut or even sort of dissolve some of that fundamental why that should be a consistent driver for everything we do and why we do it. And I think
Right.
that's what's really interesting with what's going on today.
So keeping it mission focused is really about keeping your why as the central.
Absolutely.
Yeah. See it as
And
a sphere. It's going to move, it's going to evolve, but that is really the core of what you're doing.
absolutely. The why has to be consistent
Right.
because if it's not consistent and it looks a bit transitory or ephemeral, people will not trust you to deliver that which you want to do and trust that you will create the impacts that you're so driven to create. It's that why that remains the sort of the core driver of who we are and what
Yeah.
and our place within Canada, frankly.
Right. Right. So why is this moment different then? I mean, why are we thinking about our whys um, at the same time as you're encouraging us to think about resilience politically? Now, when you say politically, I'm thinking, is that politically organizationally, or is that, apolitic?
No, totally fair.
Okay.
Lots to unpack. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my father and my father doing the same thing when he was a little boy, and they would always argue about politics. And inevitably, the young one at the table always thought that the currents of the day were so much different from the currents that had passed. So
Oh,
my
yeah.
dad would argue with his dad, as I'm sure you've experienced, about how the 70s was a completely different world than what he experienced in the 40s and the 50s. And
Yes.
it would say the world in the 90s was completely different than what you had in the 70s.
I have 5 adult children in my life, all of whom believe that, the span in which they have lived is,
Right.
the entirety of the universe.
And frankly, and when I grew up, in university, I studied political theory, and at the time, Francis Fukuyama on the end of history thesis was incredibly, uh, you know, if not popular, at least prevalent. So there was a notion that history as a whole thing was different in that day than it was from every other day before. So
Right.
I completely recognize the vanity that comes with saying my time is so different than everything else. Saying that, I'm particularly interested in not just the fact that today reflects a period of change, but it's the amount of change and how quickly we've seen it.
Right.
So, our sector has seen great health challenges, for example. We experienced SARS not too long ago. But we've never gone through a scenario where first we dealt with something like COVID, which was arguably unique in its historical presence and its impacts on our country.
Mhm.
And as we just managed to get through COVID, we felt crisis number two, which was around affordability and mitigating the back to work environment and broken supply chains and, you know, unemployment, all the things that came with the post COVID world.
Yep.
Just as we were about to get our head through that and figure out what we're going to do next, there's the whole third crisis that's coming from the politics of the South, with
Right.
the three big T's that we like to joke about. The Trump tariffs, and Trump's transformation of values. So
Right.
it's not just one
Trouble
change.
with a capital T.
Right. So it hasn't just been one set of changes, but it's the rapid fire, three major waves of change in 5 years that's really left the sector a bit reeling. And I
So
don't
it's
think we've
compounding
experienced
it.
that. Yeah.
Compound.
So I
And
don't
is
think we've
that
had that.
just for groups that are in the government's field division that need to be concerned, or is it all orgs, like the entire sector? Everybody needs this kind of, really, I see it as a muscle memory that they need to shore up. Is that what's happening? Or if you're a political organization that focuses on causes that have to relate to the politics of the day, you need to beef it up.
It's a great question. And I'd argue, and perhaps you might agree, that you can't get away from this. So
Right.
there are organizations that look to government for funding, for example, and they can see a
Mhm.
direct correlation between change of regime change and change of political priorities and how that affects potentially grants and contributions agreements
Mhm.
or reflects different dedicated line items. So there's a direct connection. But all this disruption has indirect causes that affect all of us.
Right.
So we go out, as fundraisers, we work with major donors. Major donors are able to give because they have wealth. That wealth is not all cash. Most of the time it's in equity and
Yeah.
equity in stock. That could be
Mm.
affected by what's happening economically, and all that is derivative of the sort of the political instability that we see. So
Got it.
whether it's our partnerships with companies, whether it's
Mhm.
relationships with individual philanthropists or family foundations,
Yeah.
the downstream impacts of political change seem to touch us at every instance, either directly or indirectly.
Right, which is why you come back to resiliency as a theme. So that prompts me to ask, what should organizations do? And if I'm an organization that is focused, for example, on supporting those who are underhoused or already in a precarious position, explain to me how my communications is going to be help in and underscore all of the resiliency that you're talking about, because this isn't about a politic resiliency. This is about understanding how organizations really need to have improve this and shore it up and have something ready at the moment. So what would I do?
Well, I think to start, you know, we mentioned earlier about the difference between the how and the why.
Right.
And I'm of the firm belief that it is the why that not only drives what we do, but creates the identity for who we are and creates the vehicle for delivering the things we need to do.
Yeah.
And what can happen in this sort of challenging times is we get so focused on the how and on the administration of the how, we lose sight of the why, and we lose the
Mm,
ability to convey that why to the people that we really need to work with to achieve the change we're looking for. And
because
so,
it's the motivation.
exactly, I believe, the political environment is a tricky one. You have elected officials that have a short lifespan. You have bureaucrats that have a long lifespan. You have the Treasury Board that has an intermediate lifespan.
Mm,
All of them working with their own parameters, with their own unique political ambitions, their own mandates, and their own sort of responsibilities. But what cuts through all of that, particularly as it pertains to the charitable sector, is that we're impact driven, is that
mm.
we are the best people in the country to achieve the societal change that we need to make Canadians' lives better. And it's intrinsic, or it's not intrinsic, but it's important for all of us, I should say, that we are able to convey that message in a way that's clear, clean, authentic, understood, and persuasive.
Right.
And we need to take this opportunity, this sort of chaos and maelstrom that we were sort of working, and use that as fuel to revisit that why. Ask ourselves first and foremost, does our mission transcend this chaos? Issues of the unhoused community should be important to whoever is running the
Yeah.
country, because it's important to all Canadians, no matter where, when, and how we are.
Mm-hmm.
And just even if we have disagreements about how to address the issue, which is essentially the place where politics plays, no one questions the importance of resolving the issue.
Right.
And
Because the
so
issue is apolitical.
it is an apolitical issue. So an apolitical issue should be conveyed by apolitical actors to
Right.
people who are looking for win-win scenarios with individuals that have the opportunity to help it come to fruition.
Right.
Um, the charitable sector offers a value proposition that's unlike any other in Canada and frankly in the world. You know, we are the ones that help deliver important change, and we're very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Look throughout the history of Western Civ, you will find that some of the greatest actions of social change, the greatest actions of elevation of quality of life, have not come through political action. They've come from philanthropic action. They've come
Right.
from charitable actors making a difference in the lives of the people in their community, and their province and their country and their world.
Yeah. And that's what's created the breakthrough in order to make that happen. I'm
Absolutely.
reminded actually of I'm paraphrasing obviously, but I'm reminded of Viktor Frankl's theory that if you know your why, you'll figure out your how, and that's kind of what you're describing here. But I want to go back to something else that you said, if I could, because you really described a couple of different, what I would call like Marcom strategies. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
well, sort of talk about that a bit. But there are two that I sort of see as coming out as very prevalent that you're describing. And one is a broadcast, right? The broad communication of the mission. And broadcast is, like in the marketing world, we would call that spray and pray. We're going to say it, everybody's going to get it. And there you go. We put it out there for people to listen. But then there is another one that is, I think that you're getting at a more of a constant engagement with, your partner groups, your community groups. And that is intrinsic. They are the groups that are most touched, but they're often, other groups, other actors that are in the sector that actually correlate to those groups. And I see that constant conversation as advancement. What's the difference between the two? Am I even
So,
right?
uh,
Maybe I'm not.
no, I think you've got your finger on something that's extremely important. Spray and pray, so to speak, an exclusive broadcast fails to build the quality of the relationships that we actually need to achieve the change we're looking for. Think about it from a fundraising perspective.
Right.
When we work with major donors, we don't spray and pray.
No, never. We spoke.
Right? We know that the most fruitful relationships with our major donors come through proper stewardship, from
Yeah.
being selective in terms of who we speak of, being aligned in values, being willing to put in the time and build a mutually, beneficial relationship based on trust,
Right.
shared interest, and a win-win
Mm-hmm.
scenario for both. We
Yeah.
never try to sell a donation from someone with the capacity to do something transformational. The only thing we talk about is what we can do together and how we can achieve it together.
Right.
And by the time the ask comes, it's more of an inevitable outcome of a fruitful conversation
Mm.
rather than a, Hail Mary sales ask based on a
Right.
discount, you know, purchase opportunity that we're spraying and
Right.
praying someone's going to buy. And I believe strongly that that same approach needs to be worked with our potential political partners.
Right.
We
So,
yeah.
sorry,
Sorry.
keep going.
No. I was going to say we should be judicious about who we speak to, but we should be open to building these relationships. But we should be patient and deliberate in how we nurture them.
I agree with you entirely, and I love the concept of thinking about this as a logical outcome when you are partnered in the impact, right? That
Absolutely.
a great thing will happen, a transformational thing will happen. We will partner together and make that happen. Let's talk a little bit about where the government, when you actually are engaging with them, how can they be a better partner in that to the sector? So our Canada's not-for-profit sector is a very significant economic force. We're often cited as the third largest employer in the country after retail, after manufacturing. In fact, we're called the third sector. And we contribute really substantively to the national economy, like over 8%, which isn't, something to laugh at, of Canada's GDP. So I've heard you describe the government's current relationship with our sector as one that's more like a relation with a sector of suboptimal businesses. And I think that's a bold thing to say, but I don't disagree with it. But I need you to unpack that for us. What does that mean? Why would we be seen as suboptimal? And what, help frame that for us?
So one of the challenges of advocating for the sector as a whole is that when we do our advocacy, we talk about the things we do
Mm-hmm.
and the value for dollar benefit. It's language that we're comfortable with. It's the ROI language that we ground in our fundraising, but it's also where businesses
Yep.
sit. And we tend to take the approach that we can make an ROI case to government about impact, that every dollar spent will have this achieved outcome. And it's helpful because it helps people in government that are familiar with that language better understand the what we do.
Mm.
But I believe it sells us short. Really, going back to the how and why, what we really have an opportunity to do is lead with our impacts, lead with the change we're creating in the world, lead with the legacy opportunities that come from, I guess, energizing and empower the charitable sector to do what it does best, which is change lives. I, I, I've always felt that the only thing that differentiates Canadians uh, is the path we want to take to the same positive outcome. Um, I think what's special about our country, and I'm willing to be proven wrong, that even if we have the most diverse political opinion about the how, we all agree that we want a better lives for our children. We all agree we want a healthier environment. We all agree we want clean drinking water for everyone. We all agree that we want everyone to be housed. We all agree that if we can, we want to eliminate as much poverty as possible. These things are transformational ambitions. And these are the type of big goals that government could demonstrate progress to by working through the charitable sector. And so when we go to government and we look to find those partnerships, whether it's directly through the elected officials or through their staff or through influencers, this has to be our lead leg. Otherwise, the charitable sector will be continued to be seen as a cost center and not a benefit of investment, which is particularly telling when you think, in May, our Prime Minister shared his mandate letter with his ministers. And the three areas of big impact he cited were, productivity, economic resiliency and productivity, Indigenous reconciliation, and elevation of the quality of life for Canadians. So regardless of where you sit in the Canadian government, these are supposed to be your three big priorities. And then you look at where the money was spent in the budget, and it's incredibly disappointing in a number of ways to see that none of that money is going to the charitable sector to help move those three areas. And that's where we're our best. That's where we're Canada's best. And so...
And do you think that's because that we aren't necessarily seen as having the opportunity to speak more broadly to impact, and instead government is very focused on the hows? And I think about reporting back, and you and I have both had large contracts from governments over the years, and the report back is very much about the how, and much less about the why. Do you think that has to do with the way it's framed?
I do.
But by their own language?
I absolutely do. Part of the dialogue that we need to fix.
Right.
Because right now, in order to move on the why, you're absolutely right. We have to focus all of our energies as the sector on this very complicated process of defining the how. Right. And proper advocacy for the sector would be on how to shift that process a little bit to make it easier.
And how to shift a conversation.
The truth is, for the amount of time and energy both sides find themselves working on to process the how bit, we can be going out and changing lives. Right. And so you're absolutely right. We can't completely leave that realm, but part of strong advocacy for the sector would be to shift the dialogue so that both sides of the conversation could be focused on the part that matters most.
Right. I think that's really insightful. I'm conscious of our time, and I'm thinking about those who would listen to the podcast, and busy people who are in our sector who are running on fumes in some cases, and they have only so much time. They're doing much more on much less. And for those who might not have time to read your entire paper, though they should, and I certainly, we put the link in the show notes, everybody should go and read it, because it really is a very, very important conversation that you're framing for people to have, which I don't think we have often enough. and it's in the show notes, so I'm referencing everyone. It's free, but I want to give you a bit of a quick fire. And if I'm working in an organization and I have the capacity to think about, maybe 3 free things, really free things. We're not looking to add more, strain to people's already stretched budgets, which are fluff or thin. So what are 3 free things that I could do that would actually help to make this shift and make my organization, more resilient? What would you say?
Well, the first thing I would say is start treating your potential political relationships as major gift prospects.
Steward everyone.
Right?
Yep.
So if you use a framework that we're comfortable with, what would be the best way to build a long-term, sustainable, mutually beneficial relationship with a major gift prospect? Well, first thing you need to do is look inward. Make sure you're mission driven. Make sure that not only does your mission stay resilient in and of itself, which it probably is, but that you're comfortable framing it in a manner that resonates regardless of the political ideology of the day and who you're speaking to. Be apolitical in mission. Practice, train making the case in that way. Build a message box. Develop 3 to 5 key messages that you can fall back on. And let that be the core of your communications outreach when you start building those relationships. When you're ready to communicate, which I think is something that most organizations could be ready fairly quickly, be judicious about who you communicate with, but don't be limiting. Find potential partners across every sector of the political environment.
So gather more voices.
Gather more voices. Don't presume that just because someone has a different political ideology than you do, that they may not be aligned on things where there is mutual interest, because most likely they are. They just need to hear it in a way that's authentic and true and apolitical. Use every opportunity to make those connections and steward those relationships. Right. Be patient, but don't waste people's time. Be deliberate. Create a pathway to success that only leads to win-win scenarios. Make yourself a good partner for everyone, and they will want to be good partners with you. Don't shame and blame. Don't use, don't attack one to curry favor with another, because as I've experienced in my, time, it doesn't work, and it never, because the organization that the politico that sees you shame one realizes that they might be the one that shamed later.
Right.
And devote the time and energy. That doesn't mean you need to full-time hire a GR firm or even have a full-time GR employee.
Right.
But integrate those ambitions within your philanthropic processes. So if you treat these opportunities as prospects, and you value the same way you value your richest, most fruitful prospects, you'll find that you're devoting the time and energy to build a pipeline for yourself that will be helpful, and will be helpful in ways that you can't even imagine.
Right.
And so I would say that would be the first place to start. And then
you're describing being responsive, not being reactive, which I think is key for all organizations, so that, when crisis does get compounded, you aren't panicking.
Absolutely. And I'd say, without sounding, too heavy-handed, show a little humility in the process. We all have our own passions and our interests, and we all get excited by the contacts we have and the information we have, and maybe the insight we got from a fantastic meeting that might have suggested this, that, and the other. Truth is, everything we think we are going to know about the political environment we're living in is going to change in 2 days. So if I can add one thing, and it's pretty much this, that let's approach it with a little bit of humility. We've all been in a scenario where we feel like we've gotten an incredible bit of insight from an amazing meeting, or we might have, received some insider information about one thing or another, or feel like we really have a clean line into what's happening. But the truth is, everything we think we know about the political environment and who's influencing it and how is going to be wrong 2 days from now, because the political landscape is always changing.
Right.
So if we can be steadfast and consistent in our why, be
Mm,
flexible in our how, and show a little humility with our what, we can be in a
mm.
great position to act in a resilient manner and build that resiliency in our organization, and making sure that no matter what comes forward, we'll be in a great position to roll with it and move forward on the things that matter most.
That's really, really good. Very solid, practical advice. Thank you, Jason. We're out of time. I think it's the perfect place to end. Thank you for that. I'm going to direct everyone to our show notes because the paper is available. It's free. There's an exec sum. You could just read the first page if you can't get to
Yep.
everything else, but really like get to the tips at the end because there's some really, really useful things that, every organization can learn. And of course, all of that is on the Global website. So I hope you'll visit. Thank you for spending this time with me. What a great conversation. I appreciate it. Thanks for your work.
Corinne, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure to get to chat with you, and looking forward to doing it again soon.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.
Cheers.